Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time and thank you for the invitation. First, few words about myself. My name is Yair. I'm 27 years old. I live in Jerusalem. I finished my BA in Political Science and Communication. And I'm one of the co-founders of the initiative called Shrinking the Conflict Initiative that was established exactly 2 years ago. Okay, so start. Feel free to interrupt me. I will show. I thought if I want to show like a presentation, I prefer not to. I will show during the talk maybe one video or two videos. But let's start. When me as Israeli, and when usually Israelis right now look at the Israel-Palestinian conflict, what they feel, if you ask a random Israeli, how do you feel about it? Usually they would say, we're hopeless. And because they are hopeless, they just prefer just not to think about it. Now, if I'll move one step forward to this, or I would even say one step backwards, and I'll ask why they're hopeless. So our reason for this is people in Israel are hopeless about the conflict because we learned how to think about the conflict as a 0 or 1 game, which means we either need to solve it, and if we can solve it, let's freeze. Let's do nothing, or how some Israelis can call it, let's manage the conflict, which means we have no idea how to solve it. We understand that every time there's a new war, we just open a timer for the next war, and that's it. That's how life works. When we look about the Israeli, like I would say two sides, the right wing or the left wing in Israel. So back in the days, I would say like 40, 50 years ago, after the 6 Days War, those two kinds, the left wing people and the right wing people, had beliefs. From one side, the right wing people thought that and had a belief or had a dream that the greater Israel, Eretz Israel Shlema, the big holy land that was appeared in the Bible, that includes today's Jordan and today's Saudi Arabia and today's Iraq, can be again ours. And their goal was to build more and more settlements in Israel, in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. You can, like in Palestine, obviously you can define this place in many different kinds of words. From the other side, the left-wing people looked at this issue and said, listen, what happened is that during 6 Days War, we occupied illegally many territories. We can use those territories as a strategic issue, and by having a negotiation, we can give those lands back and get peace, lands for peace, two-state solution as we call it today. But right now, as I said at the beginning, most of the people in Israel don't really think about solution. And I have to say that most of the Palestinians as well don't really think about solution. What happens right now is that instead of dreams, we start to talk about fears. Some people are saying that they're afraid of having Israel as not a democracy, because if we're going to stay in the West Bank, we'll have to make an annexation, and therefore we'll have to give them citizenship. If we give the Palestinians their 2-3 million of Palestinians that live in the West Bank citizenship, it means that Israel's state will have 50% of Jews. The Jewish state won't be with the majority of Jewish population. On the other hand, we cannot give them citizenship, but then I wouldn't call it democracy. And that's obviously without talking about Gaza. From the other hand, people are afraid of security reasons. People looking about what happened just a few months ago in Afghanistan. They saw how United States 20 years was in Afghanistan, spending billions of dollars, and 24 hours after they left Afghanistan, the Taliban took again the place, and the democracy of Afghanistan fell. And people are looking at the issue and saying, listen, we're afraid that Abu Mazen is not that strong, that the Hamas will take immediately the powership in the West Bank, just like happened, for example, in the Gaza Strip. They're afraid that if many years ago, some Jews, some Israelis were afraid of having a strong Palestinian state, most of the Israelis right now are afraid of having a weak Palestinian state, because therefore Hezbollah, ISIS, Hamas will just take control of the leadership. And honestly, what's happening right now is that if you ask people what we should do about the conflict, they don't have an answer. They know what you don't need to do, what's forbidden for you to do. Either giving land, for example, because if you give Palestinian land, they will want the whole land, the whole Israel, and they won't stop until it's all going to be a Palestinian state. On the other hand, we can't let settlers to build more settlements, because it will destroy the last chances that we have for a future two-state solution. So everyone knows what we don't need to do or what we can do, but no one's actually talking about what we can do. And I have to say that before the previous elections that happened in Israel a year ago, we asked all the political parties, we asked them two questions. The first question was, what's your dream? What's your final goal of the conflict? They all had a very easy answer, very simple answer. Either it's like one state, two states, autonomy, whatever. But when I asked them, what's gonna be your first 3 steps in the next year, they didn't have any clue. They didn't know what to answer. What they did know is that they told me, listen, it's forbidden to build more Palestinian settlements, or it's forbidden to build more Israeli Jewish settlements. And I'm saying all of that because when we entered the area, the region 2 years ago, what we felt is that if we're gonna talk again about the word solution, this word of like end game, people like will not listen. They will stop listening right in the moment, because they will say, okay, another solution, cool, but what about the right of return? What about Jerusalem? What about the terror attacks? What about the Arab Israelis who just in this week murdered already 11, I think, Israeli citizens? Like people that came from Al-Fahim, or people who came from like Hura, inside of Israel. No matter what solution is going to happen, if it's going to be like some kind of two-state solution, those people will remain with Israeli ID, with Israeli passport. And because of those reasons, we understood that we need to look at the issue differently. Now, when we look about some different things in the world, as for example, traffic jams. So if we ask random people, do you think it's like we can solve completely the traffic jams, that I won't stop even 1 minute in a traffic jam for the rest of my life? People will look at me and say, Yair, it's impossible. But when I ask them, okay, what about decrease the amount of time staying in traffic jams? Maybe using like Uber, or maybe using public transportation or stuff like that, or building more roads, or like anything. So they will say, okay, yeah, obviously it will decrease, it will reduce, it will shrink the amount of time you stay in traffic. And also we can look about global warming. People say we can't stop the world pollution or anything like that, but we can use less plastic, or we can use more electricity instead of like gas or stuff like that. And again, if we look about sometimes we meet with people and we ask them like, do you think there will be one day with no more crimes, no more murders, no more thieves, no more rapists? And they say, obviously not. So then I ask them, so why do we need the police? And they will say, what do you mean? To stop it, to avoid it, to make it as least as possible. But when we go back again to the conflict, we feel it's always black or white. Either solution, either let's freeze. And we ask ourselves, why can't we talk also? not stop talking about a possible solution, but in the meantime, or during the conversation about a possible solution, let's talk also about how can we shrink the conflict right now, tomorrow morning. So what we did is we started ask ourselves this question: what possible policy steps can happen tomorrow morning that will build trust between the sides, that will increase the economy of the Palestinian side? And obviously, if the Palestinian side's economy getting better, obviously it affects the Israeli economy as well. And we started to think, we started to meet with many people, and one of the things that we assumed is that like those steps were there the whole time. No one ever promoted them because everyone spoke about like this whole book. And every time you find in like the whole book one wet paper, so the whole book is just getting like destroyed. We're saying no. And one example I can give you is that 2 years ago, the former President of the United States, Donald Trump, presented a new plan, Peace to Prosperity. It's 181 pages. Out of those 181 pages, 30 pages were talking about a future Palestinian state, a state of Palestine. The Palestinian people have the right to representation and or declaration and stuff like that. Many people in Israel afraid of this moment because a lack of trust, because they're not ready yet. So we took away those 30 steps and put them aside for a second. 30 other pages were talking about annexation of Israel taking 50% of Area C, which means 30% of the whole West Bank, and making it like as part of Israeli state. 30 pages. We took those pages away as well because obviously many people around the world and obviously Palestinians disagree with it. We left with 120 pages that speak about, honestly, no one knows, because no politician ever talked about it. No journalist ever asked anything about it. There are many potential policy steps that everyone can agree on them. And many times people ask me in this moment, so Yair, why can't you say this moment? So you're promoting policy steps right now to have one day two-state solution, for example. So I'm saying, obviously my dream, my goal is to have a solution. I just feel that it's not the right moment for it right now. Hopefully it will come like as soon as possible. But I understand that when I start talking with people about this word solution, they're just getting, I mean, it's impossible. And we had a survey, a poll around the Israeli and Arab society, like the Jews Israeli and the like Palestinian Israelis. And we asked them, what are the chances of reaching a permanent solution in the next year? And then we asked them, what are the chances of reaching a permanent solution in the next 5 years, 10 years? And the last question was, what are the chances of reaching a permanent solution one day? And the result of this thing were like, I didn't know if I preferred to laugh or to cry. Even the last question of one day, even then, like the medium number between 1 to 5 was 3.3, which means a little bit more than like in the medium, but still I would imagine that if I ask someone, do you believe that one day we'll have here peace, permanent solution? So yeah, obviously one day. And even then, the number is not close to 5. So we start to think, okay, so how those policy steps should work and what should we do about it? But before I'll elaborate a little bit about those policy steps and then I'll open up for questions. I want to say that one of the questions we had is, what should we do like with the Palestinian side? Because we're like the people who established this initiative are all like Israelis, and we're five of us. And then we asked, like, where is the part of the Palestinian side? We have 3 answers for this. One is the conflict is not equal. There is one side that's controlling and one side that like people control it, or one like the occupying and one that occupied by. We understand that there are things that are Israeli responsibility and Israel is responsible for, and we need to ask ourselves, what's Israel responsibility about the conflict? Then we can ask ourselves, when we took this thing, we can ask ourselves, okay, so we're responsible for 1, 2, 3, but for example, we can't deal with 3 right now because 3 is can like affect our security. Okay, but we can deal with 1 and 2, for example. Second thing is that me as Yair, I meet every day with Israeli politicians, from the right, from the left, Jews, Arabs, secular religious. I don't think, we also meet with the PA, but I don't think that it's my job and my part to meet and to to tell the Palestinian Authority what to do. What we're trying to do is meet with Palestinians, with like Palestinian people. Most of them obviously are young Palestinians, and like encourage them to do it, encourage them to go to their to the PA and tell them, listen, like we don't care, like you can decide to do whatever you want, but like start to promote anything, start to do something with it. And the third reason is that we understand that unfortunately Israel is democracy and the PA is not a democracy. Last time there were elections there were 16 years ago, and last year there were supposed to happen elections in the West Bank and they were cancelled. And in Israel, I can say whatever I want, and I can argue with people, and I can have demonstrations, stuff like that. In the PA territories, it's impossible. So I understand that having an Israel-Palestinian organization combined will give us like less chances to actually promote things and to do things that will shrink the conflict. Before I get to the steps themselves, I'll give you examples. If you have any questions or anything to add, so feel free right now.
It sounds like you're saying that chunking things down into steps and taking one step forward might be the way to go, because if you talk to people about the big picture, they can't see it, but they might be able to see one step forward. So without meaning to be rude, looking at your feet and moving one foot is probably the most that most people can do. And that is possibly what we need to focus on, if I've heard you correctly.
Yes, our motto is step by step, and small steps but big impact or big effect. That's definitely how we're doing it. And I can also add that it's not that we want this step first, and then this step second, and then this step third. We have plenty of possible steps. Again, I will elaborate them in a second. And what we're doing is that we're meeting, for example, with the Minister of Transportation, and we're trying to promote a policy step about it. And then we're meeting with the Minister of Economy, and we're trying to promote a step about it. And those steps are not part of one book, which means that we can have good chances with one step, less chances with another because of like political reasons, anything like that. And it doesn't matter for us what happens first, because what we're trying to do is saying, let's move step by step, as you said, to get closer, to build more trust, etc., etc.
Look at the conflict, and I think you said part of the thing is we have to build trust between the two sides. We have to get Israelis and Palestinians on the ground talking to each other, working together. You see the organizations that achieve this, Women Wage Peace, the Parents Circle, the Bereaved Family Circle. These work together. They find that Palestinians and Israelis, in the end, most of them want the same thing. They want to live a good life, bring up their children in peace, and just basically not have to send children off to war to fight again. Now, working with Palestinians, there's always a problem that I've I come across when I'm working through the Israeli-Palestinian forum, I'm part of, is this idea of normalization. That there are many in the Palestinian side who say you cannot be in contact with Israelis under any circumstances, but that is normalizing the occupation. How can we, on the Israeli side, how can we fight this? How can we get Israelis to start seeing Palestinians as partners, not at a political level, on a ground level? How can we get Palestinians to get past this idea that you mustn't talk to Israelis?
I can tell you that it's a good question, because I'm taking part in many kinds of delegations between meetings between Israelis and Palestinians, and when you ask usually Israeli Palestinians if you could ask one thing, one thing you want to ask from, for example, we met with a member of the European Union, and he asked us, give me one thing that you want me to do. So 95% of the people, it happens all the time, what they ask is they ask for a safe space. Because right now, all the, I would say, all the delegations or the meetings that last for more than 1 hour, that can actually build connections, trust and stuff like that, they all happened abroad, in Europe, most of them. Because in Israel, in Palestine, every place has a political issue. If you're doing it inside of Israel, so it's one thing. If you're doing it inside of the West Bank, Palestine, so it depends. Area A, B, C. So every place has its own issue. And I totally agree with you. The thing is, it's really hard to meet. I can tell you that my last meeting, with Palestinians, was in Bethlehem, and I mean, you can't ignore the moment that you're entering some room, and then there were I don't know, 20 signs of welcome to Palestine, welcome to Palestine, welcome to Palestine. Now, I don't know if they did it on purpose because they know that we're coming to a meeting, just to show us, but obviously, I mean, meeting in someone's place, it's not, you don't start the conversation with with some kind of equal, or I wouldn't say even equal, let's take it as a neutral place. It's impossible to have it. So it's complicated. Every time I meet with Palestinians, I always ended up with the same issue, that I'm asking them to have a photo together, and then they say, I agree, we can have a photo only if you blur my face. And I'm saying, it's not helping me, because I can meet with my Israeli friend and then blur his face and then say I met with Palestinians. Give an opportunity to say I met with whatever, Ahmed from Nablus or Ramallah. We spoke about that, we argued about that, we agreed on that, we disagree on that. But it's impossible. And the only possible thing is just to meet with people that are part of, obviously, the PA, which is always good and nice, but first of all, you know what's gonna be their opinion, and they're not necessary. They're obviously not everyone, but they're not necessarily the majority, as far as I think or believe. And moreover than that, I mean, part of the conversation is having people from different kinds of perspectives. And for example, I think that it's important that left-wing, right-wing settlers, all of those kinds of the Israeli society will meet with Palestinians, and not only those specific left-wing people in Israel, because okay, you're trying to approve what you already know, and try to convince the people who already convinced. So it's just useless.
Yes, actually, Leon, it's similar to what I was going to actually ask. I was going to ask you, yeah, do you feel that the will is only there from progressive-minded people in Israel, or do you sense that there is the will to do something, to reach out, to come together from people within the Palestinian Authority? Are you getting the impression that because of what you said earlier, which is that democracy has sort of said goodbye in the PA area lately, certainly many years now, that it's almost like, as Leon said, the only thing any of us do is talk to progressive people in Israel, be they Arab or Jewish, or do you think that there is some scope in the PA area? And then a second follow-up thing, following on from what you rightly said here, do you get the impression that there's more that we, any of us, outside, I exempt Leon from this because Leon is dual nationality, but do you think those of us for whom this is a foreign country to us, do you think there's more we can do, those of us who do not have an obvious stake in the society? Do you depend on us, in other words? In other words, would there have been any progress without Jimmy Carter, without Bill Clinton, without Senator George Mitchell? Is it just that this is an unsolvable conflict by the people on the ground there?
Wow. Very good questions.
Thank you.
First question is that the answer for it would be, I think it depends like what's your expectations and what's your goal. For example, many times there is some terror attack that Palestinians do like to Israelis. There's always this thing that you're trying to, like many Jewish Israeli are always trying to see like who just ignoring it and who just say like what people from the Palestinian side saying, listen, it's a terror attack, those people don't represent me and stuff like that. And if you want to wait until everyone will say that, listen, it's bad thing, and not like showing photos of people that are celebrating it. And right now, like just like 5 minutes before this meeting started, so I got, because like I follow Palestinian news and stuff as well, so I saw people who are celebrating the murders in Bnei Brak just now, and I saw people who are like just like feeling sorry about it and saying that those people are like monsters and they're not representing themselves. So I think that as long as we're gonna expect that everyone is gonna like be on one side and waiting for it, so nothing is gonna change. I think that one of the things that we're trying to do is to say, yes, right now we're meeting with many Palestinians and most of them don't want to say their names, and most of them want to blur their faces. But we're meeting with them. After like 3, 4, 5 meetings with them, some of them like are saying, okay, I can like show my face, but don't say my name. So I'm saying, I mean, it's a process, and if I'm gonna like wait for like an utopian way to do something with it, so like nothing's gonna happen. The same way of as like again in my belief, when people saying okay, so I want I mean, two-state solution is like the simple way to describe it, but let's say someone wants a Palestinian state right now, and then I'm saying, okay, so let's not look at it as like 0 or 1 again, state or not state. Let's look about as like autonomy, and let's increase the amount of autonomy the Palestinian state has. Like, for example, if you can look at, like there are many examples. If you can look at like Puerto Rico, they're like a country, but some people call them as like the 51st state of the United States. They are kind of a country, but they don't have their own military. And I even sometimes give an example of Australia, because Australia is obviously a country, but every person who lives in Australia is need to swear off the like Great Britain Queen. So that's like, if I ask an Australian, do you like the Queen Elizabeth? I'm not sure he'll say yes, but you understand that this is part of like his things that he has to do. So I really think that it depends on what your expectations, and I have very big dreams, but my expectations are small and step by step. Now, about the second question, I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
Yes. Yes, just very briefly, thank you. Yeah, it is basically, do you think there's more that we need to do who are not involved? Do you think it's something that can be solved by you guys, or do you need us outsiders, if you like, to be objective and be a third party?
Perfect. So I think one of the main reasons, in my opinion, that nothing, like, it's really hard to have any process about or any progress towards like some like good things about the conflict, is that a big lack of trust between the Israelis and the Palestinian side. And I think that one of the main things that people like abroad or like in some kind of organizations and places can do is be this person who say, like, I'll give an example. When I met with the PA a few times, I understood that if I'm gonna ask them something, they're gonna say no. If you're asking it as like Israeli side, so you probably have any like things that you're not telling us, so like we're gonna like decline it. So what I'm trying to do is to talk with people from UK, United States, European Union, UN, and Germany, and tell them, okay, please come to us as Israelis, come to the Palestinians and tell them, listen, like, we as Germany, we want this to happen. And then we'll, like, what's happening is that whereas Israelis were saying, okay, if like UK asked it, so we're gonna do it, and the Palestinian side will say the same. So I think that one of the main things that can happen is to be the person who kind of like navigating between the sides, again, until we will be able to have a more bigger process. And I do have to say that there is a bigger and bigger lack of trust between the Israelis towards people in Europe, because of like the BDS movements that are growing and stuff like that. And many times what we're saying is that it's okay for you to be pro-Palestinian. There are many Israelis that are saying, yes, we want a Palestinian state. We think that whatever, the occupation is bad or anything like that. But if you want us to actually listen to you, be also pro-Israeli. Be like, say that Israel has the right to defend itself. Say that just like Palestinians has the right for a Palestinian state, Israelis, Jews have the right for a Jewish state. And unfortunately, like many people or like organizations can say the first part, but not saying the second part. And when they're not saying the second part, it's hard for Israelis and for the Israeli government, obviously, to actually believe that they're like that their goal is actually to have a good solution for both sides or a good things for both sides.
Thank you very much, yeah.
Okay, so I'll give you two examples and then I'll show you a short video. First example is about how Palestinians fly abroad. Palestinians who live in the West Bank can fly from Israel, from Ben Gurion Airport. Now, we can argue a lot about, like, is it okay or not okay, but this is the reality, and in my opinion, there are good security reasons why it can't happen right now. On the other hand, so how Palestinians fly? They fly from Jordan, which means they need to pass a border, a checkpoint, that's called Allenby Bridge border. It's located in the north of the Dead Sea, next to Jericho. They pass this border and then they take bus to Amman, the capital city of Jordan, and then they fly. Now, what we're saying is that in utopian situation, Palestinians, just like as every other person around the world, can have or needs to have the opportunity to fly abroad from the country he's living in right now. And he don't need to pass a border or to pass to another country just to fly somewhere. But on the other hand, we understand that in the reality that's calls the Israel-Palestinian conflict, right now it's impossible to have a situation which the Palestinians will be able to, whatever, build their own airport, for example. Am I as Yair, like, do I believe that we should like reach one day this situation? Of course, yes. I mean, I know it's crazy that Palestinians need to go to Jordan to fly, but I understand that right now, because of many reasons, it's impossible to give them this thing. Now, for us, for Israelis, Allenby Bridge border is just like another checkpoint. For Palestinians, this is like an airport without airplanes, which means that this is like the way they pass like security from the Israeli side, then from the Jordanian side, and after that they just like take a bus to the airport and fly from there. And I can give you one example that this cross border opens 8 hours a day on weekdays, and something like 6 or 5 hours a day on weekends, which means that if Palestinian person who got all the permits, which is also not that like fun thing to do, but after he has all those permits and he has a visa, he wants to fly, and he sees that there is a good flight from the airport in Jordan on Sunday morning, he can't go there just like as me as Yair, that if I have a flight on Sunday morning, I can just like leave the house in Sunday, like it's like whatever, 3 hours before it or 4 hours before it. He needs to go to the cross border on Saturday morning, because otherwise like the border is closed and he can't pass it, which means he needs to leave his house 24 hours before. And when we interviewed many Palestinians, what they told us is that, yeah, listen, Yair, I am like just like good person who wants to live his life, and when I live my life, I don't threat anyone. I live a life with my wife and my kids. And then when I want to fly somewhere, only because the Israeli army or the Israeli government who controls us decides that the cross border is going to be open only from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. or 1 p.m., it means that I have to get to the cross border at 8 a.m. or 10 a.m., even if my flight is like 24 hours after this. Which means that I'm like, if I'm quoting Palestinians, they're telling me, I feel the occupation, not when I like inside of Nablus or inside of Ramallah, for example. I feel actually occupation when I leave the place. I want to fly. I want to fly from my country. I understand I don't have right now my country, but I want to fly like away, and the Israeli government don't let me doing it just because, no reason, because it's not that it's forbidden for him to pass the border. He has all the rights. Just Israel decides when to open it and when to not. So one of the things that we're asking and we're trying to promote right now is making Allenby Bridge cross-border 24/7, which means that Palestinian who wants to fly, whenever he wants to fly, can go to the border whenever he wants to, pass all the like security that will take him like 1 hour, 2 hours, and then take a bus and go to the airport and leave his house 3 to 4 hours before and not 24 hours before. This is just like one example. Second example, and then obviously I will be more than happy to answer questions, is talking about work permits. Right now, there are 100,000 Palestinians that work inside of Israel. It's a win-win situation. Why? Because Israel is getting good employees that are like getting a salary that Israelis won't accept it. So like Israel is obviously like an Israel worker will ask for more money than the Palestinian worker. And moreover than that, the Palestinian workers work in places that Israelis don't like to work. For example, like infrastructure and agriculture and stuff like that. The Palestinians getting 3 times or even 4 times more salary that they would get in the West Bank. When we interviewed Palestinian workers who work in Israel and they're like their managers, we figured out that there is a very good trust that building, because there is a good relationship, a relationship between Jews and Palestinians that not only like about the conflict. Like they don't talk about the conflict. They talk about like the weather or about like how was the football game or soccer game last night, and like they're having a normal relationship of people who work together in the same job. Now I want to show you a video that shows one of the big problems in it. Can you see this?
מישהו שרוצה לעבוד, צריך לקנות.
Can you see the screen, the video?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
מישהו שרוצה לעבוד, צריך לקנות היתר.
أغلبية الناس مش تصريح شهري. من السمسار 2500 شيكل كل شهر.
حقه 2500 و2700 شيكل.
يعني كل اللي شايف هذا طالع يشتغل.
اللي بيبيع التسريح المستفيد مش احنا.
اشتغلت ولا ما اشتغلت لازم תדע.
115,000 עובדים פלסטינים נכנסים לישראל מדי יום. טוב לכלכלה, טוב ליחסי האמון וטוב לביטחון. אבל בשנים האחרונות צומחת תופעה שיכולה לפגוע באינטרס המשותף הזה. תופעת הסחר בהיתרים.
بيصفى للواحد 200 شيكل 250 شيكل يوم للتسريح 150 شيكل.
كل الناس كل مش واحد.
أنا بشتغل بعين كرم شيخ. مكتوب إني أنا بشتغل عاملة كنيسة، يعني اللي شايف العامل من هدول مجبور كل يوم يحط 150 للتسريح، اشتغل ما اشتغل مجبور يقيمه.
التسريح بدي أدفعه أنا لو شيف بدي أدفعه. بالعياد عياد اليهود الحاج سميع ندفعه. هذا بندفعه وإحنا قاعدين بالبيت.
הסחר פוגע בפלסטינים, אבל לא רק. הוא פוגע גם בנו, הישראלים. הוא פוגע בביטחון שלנו, כי אף אחד לא באמת יודע איפה הפלסטינים עובדים בישראל. והוא גם פוגע בכלכלה שלנו. שוק השחור הזה מגלגל 1.2 מיליארד שקלים בשנה.
חבר שלי נפל מאיזה מקום והתקשר לבעל
תאונת עבודה.
כן. אמר לו, אני לא אכפת לך, אתה לא היית עובד איתי. נכון, השור שלי, אבל אתה לא עובד איתי.
אתה בא לילד קטן פלסטיני שהוא בן 10 ואתה אומר לו, איך אבא שלך מביא את המשכורת הביתה? הוא יגיד לך, אבא שלי משלם על אישור 2,500 שקל. ילד בישראל בגיל 10 הוא מחפש איך ללכת לשחק כדורגל.
זה לא כתבת חדשות. אנחנו לא באנו לדבר, באנו לעשות. אנחנו היוזמה, ימנים ושמאלנים שהחליטו ביחד לפתור את הבעיות הבלתי נראות של הסכסוך הישראלי-פלסטיני.
עדיין בשלב הזה של הדיון, עדיין אני לא מבין מי הגוף, באמת יש לו סמכות לאכוף סחר בהיתרים.
כמו בעיית הסחר בהיתרים, יש עוד המון בעיות שלא צריך לחכות לפתרון הסכסוך כדי לפתור אותן. הקמנו את היוזמה בדיוק בשביל אנשים שרוצים לפתור את הבעיות האלה. בואו תראו איך כמעט בלי מאמץ גם אתם יכולים לצמצם.
So basically what you saw in this video is that those a little bit more than 100,000 Palestinian employees needs to pay every month 2,500 shekels to those people, just to have a permit. Now, like they do it because their salary in Israel is around 6,000 shekels. They get in the West Bank something like 1,500 shekels. So it means that even if they're like paying 2,500 shekels for this permit, they still have 2 times more money that they would get in the West Bank. Now, as you saw in the video, it costs like it presents 1.2 billion every year of like black market. And when we went to like security people in Israel, and we went to the politicians, and we went to like left organizations, right organizations, what they told us is that, first of all, we didn't know about it. I'm like, what? I mean, like, how come? Second thing is we asked them, okay, so like, help us, let's do something with it. And most of them said, I mean, it's not sexy enough. It's not the big issue. Talk with me about settlements. Talk with me about occupation. Talk with me about Jerusalem. about like Al-Aqsa or about the Temple Mountain, like Palestinian workers who work in Israel and then they need to pay to person money, like cash money, and like it. But we didn't give up, obviously, and in the last 5-6 months we had 5 meetings in different Israeli committees in the Knesset. We met also with the PA about it. And again, it's not something that happened very fast, but we're getting forward to it. We met with a few ministers that are like talking and doing things with it. And like I can say that 2 things happened since then. First, right now there is an application that Palestinian workers can actually find Israelis, and they can like match each other without having this like middle person that will get this money. Before that, there were no application, so obviously they will come to this Israeli and take his and pay him money. And second thing is finally the police in Israel started to arrest people who are doing it, who are dealing with those permits, illegal work permits, illegal trade of work permits. So between 2015 to 2022, there were 0 people who got arrested for it. And in the last 2 months, there were 8 people who got arrested for it. So we're getting close, like step by step. Another thing I can say is about those work permits is that in last August, we increased for more, like what I'm saying 100,000 because before last August it was 100,000, but one of the policies that we promoted last year was increasing the amount of work permits to Palestinians, and right now it's 115,000. So there are like 15,000 more Palestinians who work now in Israel and get better salary and meet with more Israelis who meet with Palestinians. And I'm like concentrating about this thing because many times people ask me, okay, Yair, but do you think that this step of increasing the work permits will solve the conflict? I'm saying, first of all, no. But this step and this step and this step and this step will get us closer to solving the conflict. The second thing I'm saying is that even if this is all like nothing for the like it's not letting us even one step closer, even not a tiny step closer towards a permanent solution, I disagree with it. But even then, I'm saying right now, in this morning, there are 15,000 more Palestinians who work in Israel, who their kids have more ability to get better food, better education. There are more Israelis who meet with more Palestinians. And I can also say those Palestinians work in Israel. For example, they build more houses in Israel, which means that the price for buying a house in Israel is obviously decreasing as there are like more houses that are getting like built. So they're like, it's win-win-win situation. So even if nothing is going to change, it's not going to change at all the chances of a solution, which I disagree, but even then, it's helping people tomorrow morning. Questions, comments?
One question I do have is, I can remember, and I can't remember all the details, about 15 years ago, Sodastream had a factory in occupied Palestine. It was run very well. It had Jewish and Palestinians working there. Palestinians were earning a good living. And Sodastream were very open. It was in Palestine, but it was there to help Palestine as much as to provide money for Israel. Partly through BDS and partly through the Israeli government of the time, it was shut down. So we can't have. Now, wouldn't it be a positive step to help start the Palestinian economy grow, for Israeli companies to invest, not to say these are Israeli products, but they're having them in the occupied territories. Be open that they're from Palestine, but for Israeli companies to invest in Palestine, in factories in Palestine, to build them up, joint initiatives with Palestinians, would that be possible?
First of all, the story about Sodastream is very sad. I can say that what happened is that Sodastream said, okay, so we can't work here. So what happened is that they just moved to the Negev, and now they work Jews and Bedouins. So they're still having it, but like inside of the Israel, like the Green Line territory. It's also one of our possible steps. The problem with this step is that the question is, I'm trying to think how to answer it from what kind. I'll give an example. Let's say we build now a company like somewhere. So if you build it in area A or area B, it's forbidden for Israelis to enter it there. So it's actually like forbidden for Israelis to do something in those areas. Now, if you do it in area C, area C is controlled by Israel. Like it's like controlled by the Israeli, like I would call it like Israeli government, which means that if Israel helps to build some company in area C, and this company is gonna be a Palestinian company, it means that Israel gave back lands for the Palestinians. So, I mean, I'm not saying that I like what I said, I'm just trying to be as much honest as possible to explain like the complexity of it. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to work as less as possible about like area, because when you deal with area and you deal with ground, it's always becomes like this big question of who this land belongs to. What I can say that we're trying to do is we'll now have some research. It's not easy, and it has some difficulties. But we're trying to say, okay, there is area C. Area C is 60% of the whole area, of like the whole West Bank. And we looked at the population in the Palestinian cities, like in area A and B, and we asked ourselves, what is gonna be approximately the population in 20 years? And obviously, in 20 years, they're gonna be like more people, which means they're gonna need more kindergartens, more parks, more football stadiums, more supermarkets and stuff like that. And then we're trying to say, okay, to like answer who area C belongs to is gonna happen only when we'll have any permanent solution. But what we can say right now is that if we decide, like as long as we acknowledge that no one is going anywhere, Palestinians will be here and Israelis will be here in this whole area from the river to the sea, we need to understand that people need to live. So what we're trying to say, and this is the research we're trying to ask ourselves, is what part of area C, like how many percentage of area C, Israel needs to give the Palestinians, not because they're giving back lands, because Israel understands that the population on the Palestinian side is growing up and they need more territory to live. And then we can say, okay, so let's say it's 3%, 5%, 10%, 1%, whatever. After the solution, we can say, okay, so this land is not part of the negotiation because this land, no matter when, Israel has like to do something with it. Now the rest of it, like we need to continue argue and wait for some permanent solution. But Leon, it's a really good question, and like we're having big difficulties with it. I'm always ask myself, like every time I meet with Palestinians and they tell me, listen, Yair, I can't enter Israel, I tell him, listen, I can enter Palestine as well. Like I'm here, but I'm doing it illegally. Just like you can just like go behind or like in the hole in the fence and like just enter illegally to Israel. Like, I mean, I'm not encouraging you to do so, but it's the same thing. So I mean, and it's relating also to the question you asked me before. If it's forbidden for Palestinians to go to Israel, and it's forbidden for Israelis to go to like Palestinian territories, Area A, B, Palestine, whatever. So how can we meet? And the only place we meet is like on checkpoints when I wear my uniform as a soldier, and like they try to pass.
I was going to say, because you say you've been to Bethlehem, I've been to Bethlehem. I pretended not to be an Israeli. I showed my British passport. But it's not. I'm not allowed to go to Bethlehem. You're not allowed to go to Bethlehem, but we do. But surely we need to change the rules in Israel. This is a step Israel could take to allow these joint enterprises to take place. And it doesn't need an agreement from the Palestinian side. It could be done if Yair Lapid pushed it through the coalition. It could happen. But surely this is something we could start as a step to say, look, part of the problem with Palestinians is we have taken away their hope. How do you think they're going to react? Let's give them hope. Let's give them something to work towards. Let's give them something. If we build together, we will have a partner. If we don't do anything, we will have no partner.
Yes. Can I just come in there? I think we need a lot more of what Leon's saying there. Yeah. I think when you think about it, if there was more that was spreading on the ground, in other words, what you're doing here needs to be wider, it needs to be better known, there needs to be more people engaging with your group and others like it. I think if you think about the contribution any of us can make who aren't involved directly as being an objective, but if you like, very involved because we know more about it, we're engaged with the issues, that's useful. But equally, these little initiatives are not so little. I totally agree with Leon on that. It's there that the progress gets made. It's like when Michael introduced himself as a councillor at a very local level, but that's where it all starts. That's where things happen. It might not be the biggest things, but that is just as necessary, I think, and it is all that many people can do. And if all they can do is a little something, the more little something there is, the more it adds up to a big deal. And at the moment, what we've got, unfortunately, is we're all waiting for some government to change. We have that in this country, yeah, as Liberal Democrats. You get the people who are obsessed with coalition governments, and the only time the Liberal Democrats got involved in one in half a century or a century, it went pear-shaped because unfortunately, the smaller party was reliant on the bigger party. What we need are the examples of any progress to be more disseminated amongst people. We need to know about it. If more people knew that there were fabulous Jewish Israelis like you, yeah, doing what you're doing, there would be fewer people saying that Israel was an awful place only, rather than Israel is a wonderful place with an awful government, or perhaps now a better government, but previously, you know, progressive people would have been able to make the distinction between, say, the government of Netanyahu and the Israeli people, just like intelligent, progressive-minded people from left to right can make the distinction between Biden or Trump and the American people. We need that to happen, I think. If that doesn't happen, there's never going to be any progress. We're all waiting, I think, for some you know, Yasser Arafat's Sadat moment and some president to come in, breezing in, who's an Obama or a Carter or a Clinton. It's nonsense, you know. If we wait for that, it isn't going to happen. Or if it does happen, it's more likely to happen as a result of more of what you're doing. So I think this little group that we've got here, yeah, just like your very significant little group, if you like, on the ground in Israel, needs to be better known. We people, as in my colleagues and friends here, we are aware that we get on with each other, some coming from the center left, some coming from the center right, and we meet on the center ground and we have a good discussion. We're friends. The sad thing is, even in our own democratic politics in Great Britain here, this fantastic country, which is progressive and tolerant, is full of division. And it's nonsense. You know, you see YouTube where, you know, it could be a fantastic place for people to engage, and instead it's full of people on the far left and the far right, all making their absurd claims about issues. We see this all the time. And I like to use the word centre ground, and it's interesting here that you mentioned the initiatives that are going on left and right. I think very few initiatives ever go on very much further you get to the left and the further you get to the right. I think increasingly it's the centre ground, the centre left, the centre right we can meet. You know, that's why people now talk about Ronald Reagan as being a progressive or a moderate, because we've seen Trump. That's why politics has changed so much. And it's absurd, you know, once upon a time someone like Ronald Reagan was considered a right-wing guy. Now we look back on him, we think he met with Gorbachev. You know, I was a boy at the time and I thought, my God, this guy's, you know, oh gosh, you know, Mr. Reagan, he's a bit of a joke. Now we look back on Reagan and he's practically a great president because he was prepared to look to the other guy and make friends with him. And there isn't enough of this going on today. Everyone's shouting at each other. We've had this discussion, Mohammed, Leon and I particularly recently, over various issues to do with personal identity and stuff. People are shouting at each other across the room. In one sense, all the important issues, whether to do with Palestine, whether to do with Israel, whether to do with transgender politics, it all becomes about two people like that shouting at each other. And I think that if we as a party, which I still think should be openly in the centre ground, and initiatives like yours that are on the ground, if we could do something to link with each other, I think that that would be the solution. And I think more than anything, it's to be better known. Some of us are either talking to ourselves or talking to other people, but nobody knows about it. The initiative I'm involved in, for example, the Houston Off-Prejudice Awareness Forum, is a fantastic initiative, but hardly anybody, you know, in the wider sphere and in related circles knows enough about it. And we just don't have the money to make it that well known. We don't even have the volunteers in the greater number. And it's true with our little group here. Why have we only got 5 people at this meeting tonight? We haven't got 5 members. We've got a lot more than 5 members. Equally, why haven't we got more members? We've got a party with between 80 and 100,000 members, but hardly anybody's joining our group. And that's not our fault. They're more attracted to friends of Israel or friends of Palestine. They're more attracted to taking that side, if you like. And I think that that's a shame. And I think more and more of us should be openly saying, we're doing something. It's just about time people knew about it. So that's me. I've said my bit.
It's not all about just one side or just the other, because we really need to find, as you said, taking those small steps forward to find a solution. And I was talking to Lorenzo and a few weeks ago. Emotionally, I believe in a two-state solution. But practically, now, I'm not sure if it's possible. I'm not sure if we have to have and I don't know which solution will work. What I do know is no solution will work if the people themselves don't buy into it, which is why we have to get people talking, get people to accept each other and trust each other and build that trust, which is what I think you're trying to do. And I think that's the way forward. Of whether we can shrink the conflict somehow, allow Palestinians more freedom, allow them to economic freedom. We're liberals. We believe in people allowing to have those freedoms to earn their money, to be able to get on in life. So we really should be trying to back you. Thank you very much. Nobody else has anything else I want to add?
No, just to say what Michael said earlier again, thank you very much for what you do, and thank you for coming and joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again, yeah?